Sun Prairie parents share their thoughts after the district released its independent investigation yesterday. Thanks for joining us tonight at 6. I'm Lee Mills.
And I'm Mark McPherson. Parents went through 23 pages to learn how the district handled allegations of sexual misconduct. WMTV's Cameron Kelly joins us live in the studio. And Cameron, you talked with two parents who say the situation was not a failure of one person.
And they have been following this story closely and are hopeful for change in the district.
I think that parents have every right and every reason to be concerned.
Hours after learning how the Sun Prairie School District handled sexual assault allegations.
My first reaction is sadness at seeing the number of ways that we failed these students and these families.
After reviewing that investigation report, I think it's very clear that the failures are systemic. And that this wasn't a one-time incident. There wasn't one failure of one person.
Parents in the district, Kalina Stephen and Taryn Peterson, are speaking up.
There was no one who stood there and said, I own this.
She said there was a lack of accountability from leadership.
You could see kind of the HR director and the principal almost giving conflicting stories of they were co-leading the investigation, or it was just the HR director.
The investigation also worried Peterson about the well-being of the students involved in the situation.
That means we're paying a lot of people a lot of money, and the students still aren't being centered at the end of the day.
Stephen says this investigation is not over.
There's still a pending criminal investigation. There is more really hard information that will come out yet.
Meanwhile, Peterson is left with unanswered questions.
I'm still curious about how policy in the future will be written in order to decide when investigations get deepened. When do you take something that's a rumor and then give it credibility?
Both parents say they are homeowners in Sun Prairie and they are not leaving the district. They are hopeful there will be changes made in policy and staffing. We know that 2 people will not be returning to the district. Live in studio, Cameron Kelly, WMTV 15 News.
Cameron, thank you. According to Sun Prairie School District's website, the investigation focused on whether any district employee violated district rules. The police department's investigation is looking at the criminal side of the case.